Princess Liaravan of the Silmari Empire stood before the assembled court, her distinctive pointed ears flat against her skull in barely contained fury. Her iridescent skin, normally vibrant with colors reflecting emotional states, was locked in dull bronze. Anyone who knew Silmari body language recognized it. Resignation mixed with anger, acceptance of the inevitable combined with profound resentment. She was being married today to Marcus Webb, a human diplomat, in a union she'd fought against for 6 months before her family and the Imperial Council overruled every objection. The Silmari were an ancient species whose empire spanned dozens of systems, but recent conflicts had left them economically strained and politically isolated. Humanity, newcomers to galactic politics, but rich in resources and expanding rapidly, offered the alliance the Silmari desperately needed. And Princess Liara, third in line for the throne and thus expendable for political purposes, had been selected as the bridge between empires. Liara had met Marcus exactly twice, formal diplomatic receptions where they'd exchanged maybe 20 words through translators. He seemed competent, polite, utterly unremarkable. Just another political functionary doing his duty to secure advantageous alliance for his people. She knew nothing about him beyond his official record. Decorated Earth military service, successful diplomatic career, various commendations that meant nothing to her because they described a stranger. What she did know was that she'd had plans. She'd been studying xenobiology, working on cross-species disease prevention protocols that could save millions. She'd had research partners, projects that mattered, a life she'd built around something other than being a royal ornament. And now she was being married to a stranger from a species barely a century into space travel. Her research abandoned, her colleagues reassigned, her life dictated by political necessity, while her actual wants and needs were deemed irrelevant. The marriage ceremony was elaborate and empty. Liara spoke her vows in the mechanical tone of someone reciting under duress. Marcus spoke his in accented but competent Silmari, which would have been impressive if Liara cared enough to be impressed by her political captor learning her language. They were married, the alliance was secured, she was trapped, and she made absolutely no attempt to hide her resentment. The first month of marriage was exactly as miserable as Liara had expected. She and Marcus lived in diplomatic quarters that were luxurious and suffocating. He was polite, respectful of her space, made no demands beyond what formal ceremony required for appearances. He was also clearly aware that she despised this entire situation and wisely didn't try to force friendship or affection. But there was something odd about Marcus that Liara hadn't expected. He didn't behave like the other political husbands she'd observed in court. He didn't treat the marriage as an acquisition or an opportunity to advance through her family connections. He didn't make demands or assert authority or try to control her beyond what protocol required. He mostly just left her alone while quietly ensuring she had everything she needed. It was during a formal dinner, one of the endless diplomatic functions they were required to attend as symbols of the alliance, that Liara's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Months of resentment boiled over into a rant about how she'd been forced to abandon her research, her colleagues, her entire life for a political arrangement that treated her like property to be traded. Marcus listened without defending himself or the situation. When she finally ran out of words, exhausted by her own anger, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked something unexpected. "What were you researching? Specifically, I mean. Not just xenobiology, what was your focus?" It was such an unexpected question, genuine curiosity rather than polite deflection, that Liara actually answered. She explained her work on cross-species viral transmission patterns, on developing early detection protocols that could prevent pandemics before they spread through interconnected galactic populations. Work that could save billions of lives, but was considered less important than her being married off for political advantage. Marcus asked technical questions. Good questions that showed he actually understood the science rather than just performing polite interest. He admitted he had background in epidemiology from military service dealing with outbreak management in colony situations. They talked for 3 hours, the first genuine conversation they'd had since being forced together. And Liara realized with unwelcome surprise that her husband was not the unremarkable functionary she'd assumed. He was intelligent, genuinely engaged with scientific concepts, asked insightful questions about methodology and applications. It didn't make the forced marriage acceptable, but it made Marcus slightly less unbearable as a person to be trapped with. 3 months into the marriage, during the formal celebration of Liara's naming day, the Silmari equivalent of birthday, Marcus gave her a gift. Royal protocol required gift exchange on naming days. Liara had received the usual political presents, expensive jewelry chosen by advisors to represent family alliances, rare artwork symbolizing diplomatic connections, things with price tags and political significance but no personal meaning. She wasn't expecting anything meaningful from Marcus. Maybe another polite, expensive gesture chosen by his diplomatic staff. Then he presented her with something that made the entire assembled court go absolutely silent. It was a fully equipped mobile xenobiology research station, compact, but containing state-of-the-art equipment from both human and Silmari scientific communities. More significantly, it came with documentation for something unprecedented: a joint research grant from Earth's Coalition Scientific Foundation and the Silmari Imperial Academy. 5 years of guaranteed funding. No political strings attached. No requirement that Liara represent the alliance or perform diplomatic duties. Just pure research support for the viral transmission work she'd been forced to abandon. "I can't give you back the choice they took away," Marcus said quietly, aware that the entire court was listening. "But I can give you back the work you cared about. The grant is yours regardless of our marriage status. If you want to dissolve this union, the research funding remains intact. If you want to continue your work while technically married, that's your choice. I thought your research mattered more than politics, and I had the connections to make people see that." Liara stared at the research station, at the grant documentation, at her husband, who'd apparently spent 3 months using his diplomatic connections and political capital to secure funding for work she'd thought was lost forever. Her skin cycled through colors rapidly. Shock, disbelief. Something that might have been gratitude or might have been anger at being moved by a gesture from someone who'd participated in taking her choices away in the first place. The court was stunned into silence. This wasn't how political marriages worked. Husbands didn't enable their wives' independence. They didn't offer escape routes. They didn't acknowledge that maybe the marriage itself was fundamentally wrong even while honoring it. Marcus had just broken every unspoken rule about how these arrangements functioned, and he'd done it publicly where everyone could witness. The gift became a diplomatic scandal. Conservative elements in both Silmari and human governments argued that Marcus had undermined the political purpose of the marriage by giving Liara independence and the means to potentially dissolve it. Progressive factions celebrated it as proof that political unions could involve actual respect and agency rather than just transactional exchange. Liara herself was forced to confront something uncomfortable. Marcus didn't have to do this. He could have maintained the marriage as it was, polite distance, mutual tolerance, performing the political function while building entirely separate lives. Instead, he'd used significant political capital and personal connections to restore what she'd lost. And he'd done it publicly without expectation of gratitude or changed feelings. She confronted him in their shared quarters after the naming day celebration, her skin cycling through colors that indicated she was struggling with complex emotions. "Why did you do that? You had to call in favors from multiple governments. You damaged your diplomatic standing by publicly questioning the marriage's fundamental premise. Why risk all that for research I told you I cared about during one dinner conversation?" Marcus met her eyes steadily. "Because you were right. You were forced to abandon work that mattered, work that could save lives, for a political arrangement that served everyone except you. I couldn't undo the coercion that brought us here, but I could at least try to restore what was taken. Whether you stay married to me or not is secondary to you having the choice to do work you're passionate about. But if I dissolve the marriage, the political alliance will survive or it won't," Marcus interrupted. "But it shouldn't survive by requiring you to sacrifice everything that makes your life meaningful. If our governments can't figure out how to cooperate without using you as a bargaining chip, that's their failure, not yours." Liara stared at him, and something fundamental shifted. Not love, that would be absurd after 3 months of coerced marriage, but respect. Genuine appreciation for someone who saw her as a person worth enabling rather than a political asset to manage. She didn't dissolve the marriage, but she did transform it. She returned to her research, spending months in the field and laboratories while Marcus handled diplomatic functions. They built a partnership based on mutual respect rather than obligation, supporting each other's work, celebrating each other's successes, existing in a marriage that was real because it was chosen daily rather than imposed once. Years later, when Liara's pandemic prevention protocols saved millions of lives during a cross-species viral outbreak, reporters asked about the unusual marriage that had allowed a princess to become a leading xenobiologist. Liara gave her characteristic answer. "My marriage began as coercion, a political necessity that took my choices away. What changed everything was when my husband acknowledged that coercion and used his position not to benefit from it, but to restore what was taken. He gave me back my work, my agency, my right to choose what my life means. That gift transformed obligation into genuine partnership." Marcus, when asked the same question, said simply, "Liara was forced to abandon work that mattered for political convenience. I had connections to fix that. Using those connections seemed more important than preserving comfortable fiction that our marriage was anything other than initially coercive. You can't build real partnership on obligation, but you can build